adult religious education through the Orthodox Christian Network, which is also a ministry of the Greek Orthodox Church of St. George. I'm Michael Haldis. Our theme this year has been the mystery of salvation, and for the last few weeks, we've been tying that to a general question of how it relates to the meaning in life and how we experience meaning and purpose. And we didn't have class last weekend because it was a Thanksgiving break, but 2 weeks ago, last few weeks, we talked about meaning of life as it pertains to our relationships or lack thereof, and how we love each other, giving and receiving love. We looked at the book of Ecclesiastes a little bit, an Old Testament book, because probably you could argue that that's probably the closest thing to a documented written book in the Bible about someone who searched for everything to find meaning in life and came to the conclusion is fear God, keep his commandments. And so we looked at that. So this week we're gonna look, and this will be somewhat of a nuanced discussion, but we're gonna look at free will choices and desires as they pertain to our experiencing the meaning of life as Christ intended and how that pertains to salvation. But I wanted to actually begin with a couple things first before we did that, because I came across these quotes and they were germane to what we've been talking about this year. They actually come from a newly published book called From Chaos to Christ, Out of Noise into Truth, written by Father Christopher Metropolis, the executive director here at OCN. It's a really good book. I recommend it. I haven't finished it yet, but I'm through it far enough to unequivocally recommend it, and not just because I work for OCN. And so Father Chris says this. He asks this question: why were we created? God created humans for loving relationships, just like we've talked about. If God is love, then the universe was made out of love. And God can only be defined in terms of love because his very essence is one of loving relationships of the three persons of the Holy Trinity. For love to be love, it must extend. So, and he goes on to say this, because we've talked a lot about relationships and community and our communal understanding of our faith, derivative of the nature of the Holy Trinity. He says, so what is God's intended purpose for us individually? To answer this, we must remember that according to etymology, the word individual comes from a root meaning to divide, to cut in two, to separate. Here's a powerful statement. For orthodoxy, individuality is a psychopathology. It means to be cut off from God and from each other, the primary relationship endowed in our creation. This thought is an existential and ontological impossibility. And again, it doesn't mean we're not unique in our persons, right? He's just saying when we think we're operating as individuals, divorced from community, divorced from each other, in an isolated way, this is where we start opening ourselves up spiritually to what's wrong. And this is what he's saying, because, and I think it's hard, again, germane to what we've been talking about. I think this is difficult because my opinion is, it's just my opinion now, that culturally, we're very much in a culture that seems to promote what I'll call two-dimensional individuality. What I mean by two-dimensional is because so much of the digital world today, you experience people not in person. You're experiencing people online or whatnot. And in that two-dimensional way, the tendencies to hate, the tendencies to get angry, all those things get exacerbated more so than if it was person-to-person communications. So, and this is how he concludes it. So what is God's intended purpose for us individually? Our purpose is to surrender our separated and separative disposition, which after all is the true missing the mark, the definition of sin, and be restored to the primary love relationship with him and others. We are called to retain our uniqueness, but surrender our individuality. We do so by identifying with the Father's icon, who is Christ himself. The primary path to this is acknowledging the icon in the so-called other. So I thought that succinctly captured a lot of what we had been talking about in the past few weeks. And I thought about something else. And Luke isn't here today, but we were here a couple of weeks ago. Luke, who comes to class fairly often, we were talking about the dynamic of loving each other, not the emotional and all stuff, but just as an act of will, the actions, the well-being of others. But I think he said, and I don't think he meant what I'm about to say, but he said but never at the expense of truth. And that stuck with me because, and I think he would agree if he was here, it's not so much at the expense of truth, but not being truthful is not loving, right? If you're having a conversation with somebody, and like this, just take the the nature of how we understand salvation, and you hear somebody say something that's not what we believe. It's not that we're trying to like bend them to our will, but we want to share what we believe the truth is for their own well-being. Now, some may get offended about that. They may think you're trying to proselytize. It depends on tone and how you do it. But that's the kind of thing. It's like it's always truth and love go together, and most of the time, it requires sensitivity and understanding and dealing with the person appropriately and divorce from your ego, right? It's all about them, not about you trying to convince somebody. So I thought that was important. So having shared that, let's get into free will and choices. And I'm going to start off with a silly question, maybe. Okay. So 2 people each have a plate of vegetables in front of them. One person loves the vegetables. The other person hates the vegetables, but they both eat the vegetables, right? Who benefits more?
The one who's enjoying it.
In a sense, yes. What's wrong, Mike?
I'll go the other way. Simply because even though he knows it's not good, he doesn't like it, he knows it's good for him.
Well, I think in a sense you're right. Like if you have an enjoyable experience is better than an unenjoyable one. But here's the thing: the vegetables work on the body regardless, right? Unless some of you more scientific types are going to tell me the mind-body connection that doesn't work. But still, the vegetables go into your body and provide the nutrients, and it doesn't really matter whether you like them or not. It still has the same effect. So what am I trying to illustrate there about choice? This is right. This is about, sounds like a horn out there.
Free will going against your free will.
Well, I guess when you're little, I told you got to eat your vegetables, right? It's overriding your free will. No, what I'm really getting at is like, I think I would react the same way you did, right? It's like, well, this tastes like garbage. I don't eat this stuff, or I really love it. So what I'm getting at, it's not always our focus on the emotional experience of the choice that matters. It's the actual choice, right? So like think about liturgy, right? How do you? I don't have an answer for this. I mean, I do, but I mean, I'm not trying to trick anybody here. When you think about your liturgical experience each Sunday in, Sunday out, if you have this conversation, do you ever ask are all Sundays created equal in your experience of liturgy, or some better than others? If so, why? So
right, you're right. If you make the choice, it'll always be better than it was if you not. So, but I do think, like, let's look at it the same vegetable question from the point of view of the mother. You have 2 children. One likes vegetables and one doesn't. As the mother, what do you want for your child? You want them to want the vegetables. And that's, for me, a very critical part of parenting. Always. Like, you make it a choice which vegetable you want to eat first, like things like that. And then it's not a battle anymore. And I do think if you're suffering while you're eating the vegetables every day and being like, oh, poor me, I know I have to eat these, but oh, poor me. And then you're creating bad pathways with those thoughts. Yeah. Whereas you create, we want people having free choice. It has to be a choice, right? And then enjoying that, because then that's reinforcing.
I was smiling because you said as a mother, because I'm not being cute here. This is really, you brought up, like, my thought was just eat them. I don't care if you like them or not, just eat them. As a father, Mike and I exchanged glances. But I think that's.
But sometimes you don't know you can enjoy something.
Yeah.
You have a thought about it. It's
Yours is the better way.
2 kids that one doesn't want to go to church and one does, but you bring them both to church, right. And eventually, after a number of experiences, the child who didn't want to be there starts to find the meaning in being there. Yeah. Those vegetables can start to taste pretty good if you dip them in something.
Exactly right. Yeah, you do you find your identity as a Christian by going to church every Sunday? Like, how much of it is really these enlightened children who want to go to church or who enjoy the experience and who, you know, I've thought about this a lot as a kid. It's like, oh, am I enjoying this because I'm seeing my friend or because I'm enjoying being with God? And like,
but regardless, something is being done to you.
Exactly.
I'm not, by the nuance in this is not to suggest that our thoughts and feelings don't matter. It's to suggest they're not the only, you know, we shouldn't be slaves to them because something is going on regardless of how we may think or feel for that day. So
our emotion, it shouldn't be who we are. And, you know, you were talking about it. It's like there are times I come to church and I'm, you know, just loving the experience and I'm getting the whole thing washing over me. There are some times where, oh my God, I'm dead tired. I need a cup of coffee and I want to stay in bed. And it's harder to come. I mean, you know, I'll be quite honest. You know, but my Saturday was filled with all sorts of stuff. I'm really tired. Staying in bed would be easy. But then, you know what? You come and you participate at whatever level you can. And sometimes it's like, oh, I feel absolutely wonderful I came here, you know. Glad I got up and did this, you know. Feeling,
I was thinking about your question of larger free will.
Yeah.
That's of the gospel.
Right.
Now, Jesus himself really doesn't specifically address that issue very much. I think of the quote, I think it's from Matthew about, I think when he's in Jerusalem and he says, at times I wish I was like a mother hen who could kind of
Gather you. Yeah.
But
it is in Matthew.
However, having said all this, really his entire ministry is really, I think, devoted to this question of free will in terms of his life as an example and the instructions that he gives us. Sometimes in a very nice way, sometimes in a very, very blunt way, but he never really forces anyone to do that. You know, even when, you know, in the New Testament, when thinking of, you know, examples like with Paul or Peter, when either Jesus appears or angels, I mean, you know, that's pretty breathtaking. You know, we think most people an angel tells you to do something, but again, it's just to sort of follow a path and not really to sort of force you to do anything. And it's almost as if, you know, I think the quote that you've said many, many times, that God is not out to get us.
Right.
He's constantly reaching out, showing us the way. We're constantly failing. But to me, the Bible itself, the gospel, all of this reaching out, that's an argument to me that there is a choice. There is free will.
Right.
It's an argument against everything being predestined. Even though God is all knowing, he knows we'll probably fail. But again, it's kind of something to kind of give you constant kind of guidance. And when I think about, I'll stop my long.
No, it's good.
When I think about the kind of vegetable, you know, when we think about Christians, God has already told you, if you listen to the gospel, you know, what is good for you, why to eat your vegetables.
Right.
In a sense. Okay, it's right there. I mean, it almost reminds me of, you know, being a teacher and saying, okay, I'm going to give you 10 essay questions. I'm going to pick 3. But a week before the test, I'm going to go over the outline to all the answers. Okay? And God is, you know, and you can pay attention to that and do that or not. God gives you that choice.
No, you make a great point because first of all, you're right. It's all laid out for us. But think about it. There's a lot of reasons why it's very difficult for us to do what we're supposed to, you know, what we're supposed to do for our own good as God, and actually to misconstrue it and think of it as a burden rather than something else. And I would say, you know, most of what Christ really in the Gospels is telling us what to do, not analyzing it, not getting, just do it, right? You know, put these teachings into practice. So.
But where's the beauty in just doing what you're told? Like, for me, I listened to your first, what you read that first passage about individuation and how, you know, we cleave ourselves from the body of Christ, whatever. And the word individuate struck me because as kids get older and they become teenagers and they start to rebel, it's what teenagers are supposed to do. Even toddlers, terrible twos, etc. At least that's what I was told. I don't know whether it's truth or not, but they call this individuation. Like that is a step as to develop as a human being that we're told that people should go through, right? And so you could either look at it like, oh, this person's rebelling, or you can take joy in the fact that they're growing up, they're becoming more of a, developed young person, and that then we can teach them the way to make good choices. That it is beautiful to first drive your kids to church and then see them excited about going to church, right? Like that's beauty in free will in all this. Like I wouldn't have wanted to have kids who just went to church because they had to.
Well, I like the way it's interesting you use the word beauty, because that's because we as Orthodox Christians, we believe the order by which we draw closer to Christ is beauty, goodness, and truth, not truth, goodness, and beauty, right? So something beautiful is usually something that, and it's going to be based on a unique personhood. All of us in this room can probably point to something in their life, some moment where they believe they had a beautiful encounter with God that struck them, and it's going to be all different flavors for because we're all different. But yeah, so just doing what you're told. Yeah, that's a start. So you hope. So somebody can go one of a couple of ways, right? So the person that just does what they're told, the please who's telling them, maybe they don't like the person to get straight A's just because they do what the teacher tells them, but don't really exercise a whole lot of thought. Maybe aren't getting much benefit as a person that's struggling, and will eventually have a deeper understanding through the struggle. But it still doesn't negate the merit of doing what you're told in terms of the efficacy of what you're being told, right? Like whether we follow Christ out of compulsion at first or something else, it's still a way to get there. And this is where the community, the communal aspect comes in, because alone, individual, we can go off track. But if we have someone to guide us, someone who recognizes, oh, John, you're rebellious. Ellen, you're obedient. And so the person guiding you guides you according to your uniqueness to something deeper than just that. And
so it's the small victories, I think, that for me have been the most meaningful, both as a parent and in really what made me decide to become chrismated in the Greek Orthodox Church. I love the Catholic Church, and it was like, I'll raise them in this church. I'm all in, in terms of bringing my kids to church and raising them in this way. But if this way isn't going to work, I haven't been raised here. I don't know. Will they, fall as much in love with this as I did? So I was sort of holding out, and I dragged my kid. Well, Vasily was gone for 3 years, and I was dragging my kids. And one time when I had my brother was at home, and I was dragging them to another church. And as soon as it was this, I went to hit on classical music to just calm me down from having to drag him away from the house. And as soon as he heard the chanting, it was on a community station. He was just like, "Oh my gosh, Mom!" Really. So for me to see that flame in him was like, okay, yes, that meant so much to me. And I saw, it was me dragging him, but then to see that, or even smaller things we could all share about younger children, to see that light, and then to see also the gratitude of thanks, Mom, and thanks for showing me the way. That's the joy of life.
No, it is. And see what we're talking about here. Think about what we've talked about in the past about how we understand theosis, salvation, as our growth in Christ, towards Christ, to become more Christ-like. And getting back to what you said earlier, John, yeah, God doesn't he doesn't force us. He doesn't compel us, right? We have freedom, not freedom from choice, but we have freedom of choice, right? And he's doing everything to guide us to exercising what he's given us, this gift of freedom, to become more in alignment, right? More in alignment. So I think that's an important thing to understand, because we're given free will to make these choices, but where do we? This is the nuance now. This is where we go wrong, is when we start fashioning in our mind these choices that there actually can be independence from God in those choices.
But following on what Ellen had said, it's like, you see, you do what you can for your children, right? Eventually they become adults, and then they're going to make, and I keep thinking of free will, I keep thinking of the action, which would be the choices you make, right? The choices we make in life. Well, there's that old expression, your life is the sum of the choices you've made, right? And maybe you have two children, and maybe one of them embraces it, and maybe one of them doesn't, or maybe one doesn't embrace it and comes back later. You don't know, but and carrying on like another conversation we've had in classes past, it's like you really don't know what's going to happen. But at least, unlike a lot of young adults these days, you've given them a foundation. And maybe if they go off the path, so to speak, where their life isn't what it should be in whatever way, and I'm not talking financial, I'm talking just the purity of their life, their moral upbringing, and their, at least they have a foundation. Maybe one day they go, oh, wait a minute. For 20 years, I'm with mom and dad, and I went to church, and and all that stuff is in there, and it's embedded. What I really feel sorry for are young people that go out, and Michael, you've mentioned this, where they're doing studies with college students, and they're talking about God and spirituality, and they say, oh, Michael, you said, nobody's ever asked me before. And you're thinking, what kind of choice can you make then? You have no foundation. So I think to a certain extent in the parent-child relationship, you do what you can, and and you've done your job, and you keep setting the example. So
let me just read. Yeah, that's good. Let me read you this because again, this is, like I said, this is very nuanced, so it's important. Here's a quote from Archimandrite Aemilianus is his name. He says, "Whether we believe or not, we belong to God. Whether we understand it or not, or feel His presence or not, or rejoice in that presence or not, He exists." Right. So the problem ultimately is the thought process, the experience of our feelings, the dialogue we have with ourselves that either doesn't exist or it's not relevant. You know what I'm saying? It's and that's the journey of a lot of people, especially those that rebel, is getting past that and getting, aligning more and more of who they are to that truth. Let me read you a quote by C.S. Lewis, and this maybe will help us. This is from his book, The Weight of Glory. He says, if we consider the unblushing promises of reward and the staggering nature of the rewards promised in the Gospels, it would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and ambition where infinite joy is offered to us. Like an ignorant child who wants to go making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at sea. We are far too easily pleased. What's your reaction to that? True?
Well, yeah. Failures. I think of the greatest amongst us, the saints. I mean, how many times, or the apostles, how many times did they fail?
Mm-hmm.
How many times and I'm sympathetic to them, because a lot of times I would have said, well, I'm not quite sure what you're talking about, but how many times did Jesus say, you guys just don't get it? And when we went through the Old Testament last year, one of the many good things that you said was, it's a book about constantly trying and constant failure. So yes, I think that's very, very good.
Why do you think? Oh, go ahead, Ellen.
I was going to say, both the saints and even just this last thing, we become stronger with free will. I think there are many examples of people who were dragged to church every day, whatever, and who then fall away because there was never a muscle they were using. It was never a choice that they were making. And then on the other hand, there are also people maybe who didn't get maybe drive to church every day, or maybe they I don't really know, but people who made other choices, right, went down other paths, and then because it was a choice to turn to Christ later, then that's a very strong. They're become very devout because they've had other. It's a choice more. Whereas I don't know. Sometimes people like. I know a lot of families, large Catholic families, who every week, and then as they hit college, it was like, or like went off, moved around the world. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's why I try very much, even as young kids, like forcing people to do anything, even studying, even all these things. If you're forced to do it all the time, then it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
No, it's all tied together. I'm just pausing because I have so many things here, but I want to tie the threads here in a way that actually makes sense. So what comes out of my mouth is useful, not gibberish. this is like I said, this is a very nuanced discussion. Maria, did you have something you wanted to
I
add?
was just going to say, I think that obedience is something that's learned,
Mm-hmm.
and even through prayer, when we are obedient and sit there and pray, like I'll get myself up no matter what.
Right.
I'll sit down and pray, but I have to push myself sometimes,
Mhm.
and I have to do that.
Right.
That obedience.
But obedience, the root word, you know this, you're an audiologist. You know the Greek word it comes from, it means to what? To hear. Okay. So we hear, this is where it means to hear. Okay. So for someone to be obedient means they're hearing just to an extent. So so too often, if we look at our faith, right, our faith is Eucharistic, it's communal. Before there was sin, everything was operating the way it should. After that, and we'll get into this, when religion, after that, what came? So in the Bible, after sin entered, what eventually came? The law, the teachings, right? Things to bring people in line, to hold them in line until Christ came himself. So if we're adding to someone's religious experience to be do this, follow this rule, right? And that's how we're driving obedience. That's not going to work. But if we're working, and this gets tough because everybody's personality is different, and you may have a rebellious person in your life, you may have a compliant person, but if we're constantly trying to do something so they can hear, remember Christ said, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." He was always telling parables, always doing something to try to break past this, so they would hear with this. Okay, so if we're in the mentor aspect of a relationship, that's what we need to be doing. Obedience, forced obedience, it's not without value, but you get what I'm saying, right? It's not going to last if someone just feels they're going to rebel if they've been just not being reached.
So in parenting, they say they can't hear. If you try to tell your kids stuff, they're like they can't hear you because they're too busy watching you. So really, and like obey, like yeah, they can't. If somebody can't hear, then they're not disobedient, right? If a child is acting out, whatever, or not following your tip, and they have a hearing impairment, they wouldn't have been a bad kid, right? So I feel like many times, sometimes people at work, I hate it when people scream at people, but it's like, you never trained her, so how dare you humiliate her, right? Like, people have to be trained in the right way, and many times for kids, it's more than just
right. I mean, I don't.
But
you're right. So when he said he who has ears to hear, he's not being literal, right? No, it's okay if you were. But I'm saying it's connoted. It's really meant like there's a deeper communication, right? And then it means knowing the person, because I know there's some people I work with, just in my study of human personality and aptitudes, I know that they hear through friction, through a bit of conflict.
oh my goodness.
Yeah. But some people are just built that way. No. When I say conflict, I don't mean. When I say conflict, I don't mean berating. There's a difference.
No, yeah.
But some people need a little bit of that healthy friction in order for them to hear. Where some people, they shrink from that. It's something that, people are exactly. I mean, I know some people, they argue. You have to argue with them, but to them, it's not conflict. It's just how they roll. And so when you get to know people, you get to know their personality, you get to know that, you try to reach them I mean, Christ did that too. I mean, not arguing. What I'm saying is, you look at the nuances of the gospel. He was trying to reach people in all the ways possible, depending on who they were. Yeah, you can lower that. But what do you think? Like, if you had to say, what's the culprit? What's the culprit that gets in our way of hearing rightly and of obeying, making the right choices?
Yeah.
Ego.
Exactly, ego. So let me read you something, because I love this quote. Say, we know that Adam and Eve were beguiled. This is by a writer named Archimandrite George. He wrote, "We know that Adam and Eve were beguiled by the devil and did not want to collaborate with God. They desired to become gods, not through humility, obedience, or love, but through their own power, their own willfulness, egotistically and autonomously. That is to say, the essence of the fall is egotism. Thus, by adopting egotism and self-assertion, they separated themselves from God, and instead of attaining theosis, they attained exactly the opposite, spiritual death." Okay, so ego. Remember what Paul said? This is interesting because this will appeal to all of us. He said in 2 Corinthians 11:3, "But I fear lest somehow, as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, so that your minds may be corrupted from the simplicity that's in Christ." Or another way to say it, "But I'm afraid that just as the serpent deceived Eve by his treachery, your minds may be led astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ." Now remember Adam and Eve. Adam is sitting right there too, so he's equally culpable. He didn't stop anything. But this is what I'm trying to get at, that sometimes in our intellectualism or whatever, we overcomplicate things, we overthink things. And we're also in a culture, I think at least, that puts such a premium on thoughts and feelings that people can go around thinking that's who they are. I am my thoughts and feelings, where usually most of our problems come not from our thoughts, but from our thoughts about our thoughts, our judgment of our thoughts, right? That kind of thing. Like, I don't feel like going to church. Okay, that thought comes in your head. Well, you start thinking about it too much, you're not going to go, right? Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And everything is in communication.
Right.
With that person.
Mhm.
It's how you communicate with them in order for them to want to do something.
Mhm.
So
Right.
in other words, if somebody comes and, they're screaming and yelling at you and you're treating a person like a little baby, what are they going to do? They're going to rebel.
Right.
Okay.
But the how
So
gets,
it's how you're communicating.
it's how you're communicating, and that gets back to the three-dimensional way we should deal with people, get to know them, understand that, like how you communicate with somebody, like in our friendship, me, you, and Mary, we all communicate with each other differently based on our personalities, right? You and I are a lot more blunt.
Didn't
Right.
you that first quote that you read at the beginning, that you mentioned the two-dimensional thing? You cited that book and then you read something.
See, which one did I
It
read?
was
I got so much stuff in front of me.
yeah, it had to do with the guy from Ode.
Oh, it's the end, Father Chris? Yeah. Which one did I read? About the one about individuality being a psycho?
Yeah,
So
it was.
what particular? Which?
No, it was just because you related the two-dimensionality thing and.
Oh yeah, I said so. What I said? What is the one that goes? So what is God's intended purpose for us individually? The answer to this, we must remember that according to etymology, the word individual comes from a root word meaning to divide, to cut in two, to separate. For orthodoxy, individuality is psychopathology. That's the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. It means to be cut off from God and from each other, the primary relationships endowed in our creation. This ties into Genesis, right? This is what happened there. They asserted their own will outside of God, or tried to, which is impossible. That's the whole problem. We cut ourselves off from God. We're not really cut off from God, but we're operating in a false.
I always took Genesis story as they chose a really hard path. It's got to say easy path.
Yeah.
It chose a really hard path. It doesn't abandon them.
No. They chose a crazy path given, because remember, look what happened. Like what's described with Adam, right? Now you're gonna have to work for food to come from the earth, whereas before everything was in communion and harmony. And then Cain even was worse, right? It was like now the food won't even yield. The earth won't even yield food. That's why he founded the cities and technology and all this stuff to bend creation to his will. So they chose, but they were never abandoned. Yeah, never abandoned. God was always working for their salvation from the beginning, and that gets back to the point we talked about.
Kind of
Yeah,
is a compliment to that. So
Exactly, because the old man in that story was the God figure, and he ran to the son, and running back then.
And the son learned a different way.
Yeah, to your point, I learned different. Well, I don't know if the older one ever really learned, but
Well, he keeps following the rules.
he was bitter in his following. He wasn't following them out of joy, out of understanding. Yeah, but the father in the story, in that parable, represents God. So God running towards us when we just do that metanoia, that repentance, because running back then was like an old man running was considered undignified. So that story was of, that's why a lot of times in the gospel it'll use the word, and they marveled at the teaching, because he was teaching things that were like, wait a minute, old men don't run like that. That's not dignified. That's
Maybe it's an oversimplistic point, but I noticed in that quote, it's a cut yourself off from God, but also cutting yourself off from the rest of us.
Yeah, well, same. It's really the same thing.
That being an important thing too. Because what was the most important commandments is love each other.
Yeah.
Love God and love each other.
Well, they're really the same thing. If someone cuts themselves off from everybody, but prays at home and goes to church, but is cutting themselves off, they're like the Pharisee. What's the parable of the publican and the guy in the temple was like, I do everything right, but he wasn't in communion with his brother over there. It's the same thing. That's why, and I think somebody brought it up earlier. At least you said something that made me think of the reality of 99.9% of our experience of God is always going to be through others, because God loves us and chooses to choose. His goodness is going to be accomplished, but he invites us to participate in his goodness, and that's why most of us experience God through the love and charity and beauty of other people. But
I look at it too in terms of both faith and works being important.
Well, they're the same thing.
Not only that you believe, but also, well, you can be someone who sort of believes in God, but doesn't really carry it out in your life.
Like St. James said, even the demons believe in God. What good is that, If they were the first person to even know who Jesus was in the gospel, the demons recognized him, the people didn't.
Yes, it's a gift, but it's an earned gift.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the works come in.
Well, the reason I was harping on what I just said a moment ago, because I know what you're saying, and I agree with you. The reason I'm a little hard on just believing, because I think part of the problem here, at least in America, I can't speak for other countries, I think too much Christianity is like, if you go to websites on churches, it's always what we believe. Well, it's also what we do. It's what we practice. You can't have one without the other, and it's false. It's false if some people think if I just believe this, that's having faith. Belief is no, because I'm gonna have a quote here. This is kind of scary to me, at least. Maybe not scary to you. It's what we do. So this is one, Bishop Emilianus is his name. He has this quote. He's talking about the sheep and the goats, and he's imagining Christ talking to the goats, my child, or at least a single goat. Have you ever thought that ignorance and forgetfulness are the two greatest sins? You lost the aim in life. You lost the salvation of your soul by ignoring and forgetting your poor and miserable brothers and sisters, by forgetting and ignoring the fact that I am in them, I am in you, I'm in everything. There's no excuse for you not knowing me, your creator. You lost your aim by making yourself the only thing you ever remembered and thought about. You are far from the actual purpose of creation. You failed. Imagine hearing that. But it ties to, what's sheep and the goats about? It's about the sheep. The sheep were what we're talking about. They were perfectly aligned in Christ. They weren't even thinking. They were just doing. Right. That's where the saints go. Right. That's the path they're on. So it's far beyond just believing. Believing, if we're satisfied in what we just believe or think or feel, we're going to deceive ourselves.
And people are fickle.
Yeah.
They'll believe one thing. They believed he was the Messiah, and a few days later, they believed he should be crucified.
Gets worse than that, because you remember who they chose to free? Who they remember? Yeah. What was his name?
Barabbas.
What does Barabbas mean? Son of the Father. And what did Christ? This is in the Gospel of John. What did Christ often say about the believers? They told them who their father was? The devil. John. The whole Gospel of John is juxtaposing this choice, right? And so, you know, I'm not saying we're all choosing the devil, but the point being, and we're not going to have time this week. Well, maybe a little bit, but from Father Thomas Hopka, I have some teachings here from him that we always have to be examining, because we're not autonomous creatures. That's a lie, right? We're either with God. We think we are, but whose will are we exercising? Which father? That's what that's ultimately teaching us, right? And the good that we don't do that we can do, we're following. That's not the will of God, but just like what we're discussing here, God is always trying to get us to come back or get us in the right direction, and that's why I think it's so hard sometimes for people to understand. Especially if they don't have the right religious sensibilities. Now, how can God permit evil? Because he wants that evil to go to good. He wants those people to change, right? He sees a bigger picture. He sees a bigger thing. We just see what we think is gross injustice. And he loves everybody. That's really hard. That's why Christ said, love your enemies. It's hard. I think it's hard. Maybe some of you are more involved than I am. I think it's hard to think about loving evil people and really hoping for their redemption and repentance. Yeah. But God doesn't see it that way. So, it gets difficult. But I have a comment here. It's about what we do. What about the elderly who come to Orthodoxy late and are housebound? What can they do? God understands their circumstance. God understands exactly. So if you're housebound or you have limitations or you have certain things that others can't do, God knows exactly your circumstances and what you can do. He accepts. Right? We've talked about the nature of theosis. Right? That God's grace is He's going to take, even if there's only a little bit in you, He's going to take that little bit in you and give it His grace. Right? But this is what C.S. Lewis is talking about. Well, why do we only want a little bit? Right? But people like that, He knows our individual circumstances, and some people can do nothing more than pray for others in the privacy of their home because they have infirmities, they have challenges, whatnot. But that's why also Christ talks about whoever has more, the expectation is they will do more, right? So, which
it's so difficult to be in that circumstance and to even just have hope through that.
Mm-hmm.
It's great. That's giving praise.
Well,
I mean, and that's a big battle.
It's a huge battle, but this person, whatever that person's circumstance may be, the other way to look at it too, and this gets tough too, is those God permits certain conditions too for the salvation of others, because those persons in their infirmity draw other people to them to participate in His goodness for the care of that person. So, in the end. And maybe we'll start winding down with it. In the end, a lot of this is continuing to do your best to remain prayerful, living the sacramental life, so that you can understand to the best of your ability the circumstances in your life, and you can make the choices, the Christ-like choices within those circumstances that God's permitting in your life, and getting past some of the barriers, whether it's our own ego, our desires. Or lack of desire. I mean, I'll confess, I got up, my back hurt, I couldn't straighten up. I'm like, I don't want to go to church. But here I am, and here we are. We're having a wonderful discussion. So, I mean, it was a thought, but it was a fleeting thought. You know what I'm saying? We all have these things, but if you give in to them, and this might be the first generation in a while, maybe. There's a lot of people out there that have young people, especially, that are growing up for the first time that have no religious sensibilities because of the culture, because of what's been given to them in culture. And so we who have the privilege of having them have to be patient and understanding and real. I mean, I first realized this actually. Remember when I spoke to you, I was going into Walter Johnson to talk to the high school kids. So I've been going in there for every year now for a few years. And when I first went in, I realized one of the mistakes I made was some baseline assumption that some people in that room would know Adam and Eve or Noah and the Ark and all that. Not only was that incorrect among those that identified as Christians, because of the plurality of our culture, there's people that didn't know what I was talking about because that's not part of their faith tradition. So, and then some had no religion whatsoever. And so there's it's a different dynamic now, and that's why for us to understand these things about ourselves and how, it's going to help us relate to others better, more patiently.
Well, the Winston Churchill graduates are more refined than both.
Okay, let's go in there then. Let's go in.
But he was a great pitcher.
That kid.
Yeah,
Baseball. That's okay.
second to Cy Young in victories, as I recall.
That's right.
Yeah. No, but anyway, hold on. There's another comment. The point of drawing others is happening. My neighbor suddenly can't do enough for me. I feel so beholding. I pray fervently for them. That's wonderful. So that's a wonder. Thank you for sharing that. I'm assuming your name is Paul by your email, but if not, I'm sorry if I got that wrong. But thank you for writing that comment and sharing that with us. And I think, and I'm sure you feel grateful for them. They feel grateful for you. My guess would be, because I think even when we're reluctant to do something, especially in caretaking or things that are challenging, I think we would all say that as hard as that may get, the benefit and the growth we get from it is, and it actually makes you like your vegetables, because I think, well, what I mean is when you're reluctant to do something for somebody and you're kind of grumpy about it and because it's inconvenient for you, and then you do it. Whenever you do the things of God, it always feels good anyway. Not that you want it to be an emotional high, but this is a gift He gives to us that we can have. We have these emotions and feelings for a reason, but when they're aligned with what we're supposed to do and we can enjoy them, that's wonderful. That's why we have guilt too, because we're not. It's correcting. Well, it's 12:30. Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear.
I just wanted to say, what happens when you have two individuals or groups of individuals that have separate thoughts and separate religious thoughts, and you're trying to figure out what they are, or what you're trying to figure out where they are going. What do? Or how can you learn to try to understand that?
In terms of if you're dealing with people that have different religious beliefs or different thoughts in general,
Different thoughts and different beliefs, yes. But there's different thoughts in the sense of different beliefs.
You're asking the question, what do you do? I mean, how do you relate to them, or what's the context?
How do you try to understand what they're doing, or how to get through to them?
Get through to them. Well, I think, first of all, you got to get to know them. You have to have a relationship with them. You have to, and then if you're talking about sharing with them the good news of the gospel, for example, I think that again, it's in the context of relationship and developing friendships and deciding to do your best of your ability. To Maria's point, how you share with them, when you share with them, try to not create barriers, but try to reach them, and be patient. Christ.
I see your example as well. And going back to the parenting, if all you ever did was drag your kids to church on Sunday, but the rest every other day of the week, you're not practicing. The church, the home is a church. It's a small church. So if you're not practicing what you believe and what Christ taught, dragging them to church is not going to do them good, or yourself.
Even what you're practicing in the home could be correct for them, and what you're practicing in the church is not correct.
Yeah. So I think that personally, I kind of have seen this, because Greek Orthodoxy is a sort of minority religion right here. I think that some people can. My kids, for example, really want to raise their kids in the Greek Orthodox Church, and I'm trying to be hey, we need to look for people who are demonstrating the fruits of the Holy Spirit. They don't need to be, this is just mine. Don't tell Cecilia. we need good people, right? So if I would emphasize that commonality, right? If I understood you, you were saying that you got along. You think that they strove to be good people, etc. I feel just my personality is that I always try to build on connection of what we have in common, right? And then emphasize everything about our faith that resonates with that and accepts them and includes them. But of course,
Yeah, I think you talk about reaching people where they are, and I think that's important. I think, but I also think we have to be careful because Mike and I were actually talking about this earlier. You know, one of the problems with ecumenism today, there's two problems. One is when beliefs get compromised that just aren't true, right? The other is then because people are afraid of that, they don't have relationships, right? So I think, to me, like when I went and spoke, when I told you I went and spoke at Emory, and what I was talking about there was really about just creating conditions to serve together, to form friendships, to form relationships. More important than anything, and not have divide from each other, not isolate from each other because of cultural differences or belief differences. And then over time, because I think, like, for example, you know, we, like, as Orthodox Christians, we have a very different understanding about salvation than some other groups of Christians, right? And so it wouldn't be loving and truthful for us to compromise on that belief just for the camaraderie of the relationship. But it also wouldn't be right for us to come on strong right away if someone wasn't ready to have that conversation.
right.
And
There's
so,
like a lack of humility there.
yeah.
And I think that if you're striving towards truth, like that's why I do love the Greek. Because like this is what this, if you look at this translation, this is what this really means. Like I think that I love Greek Orthodoxy because you can see more truth with the language and stuff. And I think that as long as we're all seeking the truth, right?
Yeah.
And Alex, if I may, I think the example you were just citing, it's very likely that one that was opposite your thought process might have been had a lot of cynicism against organized religion or against the priest or whoever it might be, without looking at the big picture. That's probably the opposite side, where the person that was thinking like you has faith. I mean, that's my thought.
So what do you do about the Christian and the non-Christian now? We've been talking about Christians, but what about the non-Christians and how you deal with them?
Well, I think it depends on the person.
dealing with non-Christians.
Yeah, he was dealing. Yeah.
Joke,
Actually, it's funny because in the Gospels, a lot of times he's holding up the examples of the people outside the faith as the ones that were.
Well,
yeah.
I just had a discussion with my cleaning lady yesterday. She saw someone on TV and said, he's not a Christian, he's not a good person. I said, whoa, I don't think you can make a judgment just by saying that.
Well, that gets back to that
that
gets back to that two-dimensional thing we're talking about.
So the Christian who doesn't practice his faith is a better person than this person who does loving things and caring things.
I'm not very Christian.
Well, again, here's the thing. Remember, there's the old saying: if it's Christian, it's true. If it's true, it's Christian, right? And this is where Christ held up the example of the Samaritans at least 3 times, because they were doing the things of God, even though the people that were following all the rules, if you will, weren't. So it's not enough to just judge on the surface, right? And so that's why I said a lot of it's circumstantial, but it depends on, like, if a person who's not Christian is in your life and they're not showing any inclination to want to even learn or whatever, then you need to be patient in the relationship. You need to pray for the person, because we want to be like Christ. We want all to come to salvation, and we believe salvation is theosis. It's becoming, it's entering into that deeper relationship with Christ. So we would pray, and then we would wait. Christ says in Luke 21:19 or 19:21, I get that inverted, is by your patience you will possess your souls. By your, and that could also be translated, by your endurance you will find your life. Well, that's what we have to extend to others too. And sometimes it may take a long time before that time and place are ready for you then to be Christ-like in that person's life. But if that person is asking a lot of probing questions, then I'd say what you do is you answer what you can, but be very careful to not answer what you don't know, and just say, I don't know, and I will get the answer from somebody or something like that. Don't in your ego or in your zeal do something wrong that's going to mislead the person, because that's easy to do too. You get enthusiastic and you start, punching above your weight or trying to. That's why in Orthodoxy we like people to bake for a while before they're in those mentoring roles or teaching roles or whatnot. So you guys can decide if I've baked enough or not. Let me see. But one thing I want to, so this person, Paul, my neighbor's kindness is teaching me to be accepting. Sometimes accepting is harder than giving. That's very true. And that gets, because we all have that, we talked about that ego, not ego like bravado, but just because it's so ingrained in us to be individually independent that when we have dependency, it doesn't feel natural. But that's actually the natural state God wants us in, is to have that mutual dependency upon each other. But we feel, we're going to be a burden, or we're going to be this or that to somebody. So, but anyway, Paul, thank you again for sharing that. That's very germane and very important to what we're talking about today. So I think we'll end there. I know this is a good discussion. I'll get next week, plan to get into a little bit of again, diving deeper into the nuance of our freedom to make choices, but exploring, is it really autonomous like we think? Or, what's the relationship of our freedom and free will to the omnipotent, all-knowing God? And if you want to read Romans 7 and 8, go ahead and do it, because I'll be basing this a lot on what Father Thomas Hopko's commentary on what Paul wrote in Romans 7 and 8, which is where he gets into a lot of that. Is it me doing it? Is it Christ in me? Is it the devil in me? Kind of delving into that. So I will warn everybody. So I do have a medical procedure on Friday. So I should be here on Sunday, but if I have to cancel, because then we'll just get back together on the 21st instead of the 14th. But as for now, we're planning on having class next Sunday, the 14th. So God bless everyone. Have a wonderful week, and we will see you next